Right. Howdy, everybody. My name is Nake Flores. I'm a core organizer and member of Prutehi Litekyan Save Ritidian, and here with me today are some of the wonderful members of the International Women's Network Against Militarism. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to the organization's website in the chat for folks following along, and I'm just going to give a brief introduction of the great panel that we have here today. With us today is Attorney Corazon Fabros. Attorney Fabros is the co-president of the International Peace Bureau. She's a core member of peace and security at the civil society process at Asia East People's Forum. And also she's the lead convener of the Stop War Coalition Philippines and Nuclear Free Philippines. She's also the focal person for the Philippines for the No Nukes Asia Forum. And it's an honor truly to be here with Attorney Cora Fabros, a hero to many of us in this movement. I've just pasted her bio and linked to her bio in the chat. We also have Reverend Deborah Lee, who's the executive director of the Interfaith Movement of Human Integrity, an organization working for the dignity and full inclusion of immigrants and people impacted by incarceration. And I'll go ahead and share that in the chat. And then we also have Dr. Isa Areola. Dr. Isa Areola is a Northern Marianas cultural anthropologist and indigenous rights activist from Saipan, who lectures in critical indigenous studies in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Concordia University. And she's also the chair of our Commonwealth 670, an organization that advocates for the demilitarization of the Pacific. And Dr. Isa's organization, our Commonwealth 670, as well as Prutehi Litekyan, are some of the organizations that have signed on with the International Women's Network statement for an urgent call for feminist genuine security for the people of Palestine, Israel, and the wider world. And that statement was circulated to you yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and share the statement again in the chat for your reference. And so now, I thought we could start by briefly sort of each of us talking about, some of the different issues we're bringing with us today. We're all involved in different kinds of work for peace and demilitarization and genuine security in our own communities. This, for us at Prutehi Litekyan and also for those of us, for the members of our Commonwealth 670, we were, proud to sign on to this statement with the International Women's Network. I just also want to mention that Dr. Isa Areola and myself also attended a convening of the network in the Philippines earlier this year in May, where members of the international network, including folks from the Philippines, Hawaii, Korea, Japan, Okinawa, the United States, Guam, and the Northern Marianas attended. It's really an honor to be with this huge international network. And this network worked together to develop this statement. Reverend Deb and Sina Cora are two of the longstanding members in the network who know most about their work, but also with the longstanding relationships that the network has with people on the ground in Palestine. And then Dr. Isa and myself, we really saw the need to also connect issues here in the region. There are many parallels, and we'll talk about that, many parallels that we're experiencing here in not just in the Marianas region, but in the larger Micronesian region with the, expanding military presence here. Many parallels that we can draw between us, Palestine, and many other occupied, indigenous lands around the world, including the Philippines, Hawaii, Turtle Island, Puerto Rico, Okinawa, and many other places. And so with that, I'd really love to turn it over to, Sina Cora and Rev Deb to start us off with some thoughts.
Some intro, you mean, Nate? Well, I think that, well, first, let me thank you for this opportunity to be able to join you in this conversation, including to, to our media friends from Guam. It's always been, a challenge to reach out to media. I think not only maybe that's your experience in Guam, but also in the Philippines, much so that a lot of our media friends in the Philippines have become, victims of military harassment and other human rights violations. Uh, so I just really like to say that, to appreciate the presence of Pauline and Thomas here in our conversation. Let me just go back to, if we're talking about our involvement in trying to shape the direction and the work of the International Women's Network Against Militarism. I would say that it's always been, and you could see it in this through the statement, that over the years, since its very beginning, um, it speaks out of uh, a response to the situation of militarization in this region, in this part of the world, particularly when we look at the situation in places where foreign military bases, like that of the US, mostly, I would say, are present, big or small. It could be the military facilities that we could easily see, enclosed places, which are under the direct control of the United States. But it could also be facilities and agreed areas of location. Very often they call this the lily pad or whatever. Like our experience in the Philippines after 1992, where the U.S. bases had to be closed because of the decision finally of our Congress, your parliament equivalent, decided to say no to a renewal of the military bases agreement, which these facilities were in the Philippines for almost a century, actually. And I would say, in a sense, many people are saying we have been lucky to have that. But, after several years, we know that given the very active and critical and strategic role of the Philippine archipelago in terms of the U.S. projection in the region, we know that something is being cooked up, and we were not wrong. Now we see the Philippines having agreed to 9 locations. Well, technically, our government is saying that this is not a military facility because they are under the control of the Philippine flag flies. so so they are technically, they say, Philippine military bases, but at some point we know very well that all of these facilities are under the control of the foreign military forces. You see, it's not only the Philippines, the United States that has now the Visiting Forces Agreement, no? Japan, the very recent one, will be able to come. So it's not an exaggeration to say that that the Philippines have become a big military base, and we are concerned about that because there are many problems. So maybe we can talk about that later. But going back to the international network, it has that very important work to point out the impact and the role, the impact on women and children in general, and the specifics of it, and also that that any struggle does not come out of the blue, but it is also developed through an important knowledge of what these are, no? And also that it responds to a big need to unpack, to expose the meanings and the real how would I say this? Who oftentimes we are being presented with something couched in words that are not easy to understand, and so that it remains a very important work to be able to understand the deeper meaning of it, And I think that with with media, especially these days, when there is a lot of misinformation that's going on, whether it relates to the current things that are happening in Ukraine and in Palestine, they're the same, like the narrative is either intentionally or unintentionally being changed or couched in different words that it would mean, it would appear like it's not really that important. So let me stop there because I don't like to ramble on, but that's I think where I am at this point, and we can continue talking about it later.
Thank you so much, Cora. I'll just add a little bit about just the network. The network is almost 30 years old, and it's been bringing women feminists from different social locations across the Asia Pacific and also Puerto Rico together, who all share a common experience of US militarization on their lands. And our efforts as a network has been to try to support each other's struggles, to learn from each other's struggles, and also to come together as a united voice to put forward a feminist understanding of what genuine security is. Genuine security in contrast to military security. So although we haven't focused on Palestine and Israel because we've been primarily focused with the conditions in the Asia Pacific region, the dynamic that's unfolding in Palestine and Israel, where there's such an assertion of military security that has already been tried for decades, some would say, 75 years, they've already tried this one way, and it hasn't led to more security. It, in fact, has led to the lot of deaths of innocent civilians, thousands of innocent civilians just in 1 month. So really felt like it was very important for us as a feminist network to put forward a vision of what genuine security ought to look like, and the principles that genuine security could be based on, principles of interdependence, collectivism, and our relationship, the dignity of and the respect for every human being and our relationship with the natural world around us. So it was very important for us to put out this statement and to connect the issues that we see unfolding in Palestine, also issues, like that are happening in Guahan, but in other member countries of the network. I mean, the issues of ongoing colonization, the impact on indigenous peoples, the way sacred lands are being abused and misused, and ways that places are, places that are really important to people are being used as strategically for national interests. And that is no excuse for the ways that, that's no excuse for what's happening to Palestine right now, nor is it an excuse of what's happening to places like the Philippines and Okinawa and Guahan as well, and the Northern Marianas. So, I just want to say that was kind of the reason for this statement. And we wanted to share this. These are the principles for genuine security, that genuine security is not going to come through militarism and conflict and war that we see being projected by the state of Israel, funded by the United States in this last few weeks. But it has to be a genuine security that's based on sustaining the environment for all people on the planet, guaranteeing basic needs, people's self-determination, and that this is where the faith part for me as a minister comes in, that we have to organize our societies to prevent harm. And as a duty, all religious traditions call for the prevention of harm and the sacredness of life. And that's the conditions that we're in each day now, where every day it seems 1,000 more people, the death toll keeps rising by 1,000. And so we have to call for ceasefire and call for a real redirection of the way our investments, our financial investments, are going towards militarism.
Thank you so much, Sina Cora and Reverend Deb. Really appreciate you being with us. And, to draw the parallels too with what's happening here, if we look at the things that are happening in Guahan and in the Northern Marianas and in the long history of US militarization and occupation here, we can see all of the evidence that proves that increased militarization actually doesn't keep us safe. It makes us more insecure. When we're talking about things like food security, water security, we're talking about cultural sovereignty and the protection of our cultural practices and our ancestral burials, our sacred sites. These are a lot of the issues that we're also seeing compounded in Palestine, with the siege, with people being, under siege and under apartheid, not having access to water and food right now, with the electricity being cut off. These are really horrible atrocities that are taking place. And, we felt the need, our organizations felt the need to join this statement. Being silent is being complicit to these atrocities. And, as people of the Marianas, as colonized people of the Marianas, we can speak from an experience, a long history. Our folks have been victims to genocides throughout our history. We have had war here. We have been forcefully displaced and removed from our homelands, for them to be occupied by military bases. There's so many injustices that really are parallel, are similar to what's happening in Palestine, in the Philippines, in Okinawa, in Korea, in Hawaii, in Puerto Rico, in all the places where the network members draw from. And so, I also feel like it's just, we have to say that, uninterrupted colonization in the territories is unquestionably interconnected with the violent oppression and erasure of Black and Indigenous people everywhere, ultimately impacting our rights to life, health, and food, as well as our cultural survivorship. And we want to determine a future that aligns with our Indigenous values of respect, care, and sustainability, and not one that is defined by US military interests and occupation and US imperialism. And so these are the reasons why we aligned with the network statement, and we support the network statement, and we're proud to be endorsers of this statement. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Isa Arreola.
Thank you so much for being here, Tomas and Polly. Really appreciate it. And also to Auntie Cora and Rev Deb, and of course, Maneka. Nick, we OCW felt it was really important to this issue, in part because, we're often facing such disparate projects in the Pacific, such disparate, seemingly disparate, I'll say that's a very important qualifier, right? Like these projects seem like they're all very disparate and separated by the military. You have, for example, various EISs released, right? Like for each project. And what this network is helping us to understand, because like that's happening in even our own region, right? So what this network is helping us understand, right, is that and this conflict that's happening in Israel, I mean with Israel, is that militarization as a process is really, it works hard to segment us, right? But we're not all these disparate dots on a map like these plans would have us believe, right? In reality, we find that we're very much interconnected, right? And in our case, with the conflict that's going on, it's directly impacted by the military industrial complex, right? If we have $3.8 billion annually going to military and missile defense systems in Israel, where does that place us? How are we complicit in the kind of like continued the continued support of militarization in that particular region? And like, for example, I was reading about the package, the recent $105 billion supplemental package that the White House has asked Congress for. And if you look at that package, there's a triangulation of 3 issues: Ukraine, Israel, and guess who? Indo-Pacific, right? So right away, that gives you an inkling into to the ways that we're already kind of connected in these cycles of funding, right, and military funding. And so, and when you look at most of US assistance to Israel, really is coming from weapons grants, right? So why is Israel's military so equipped, right? Why do they have some of the latest, military equipment and technology? Who's funding that, right? We have to look at where the money's actually going. This is a US-backed campaign. I mean, really, if you follow the money, right? And so we really need to be part of divesting from that military industrial complex, from that system of militarization on our end, right? And so, and again, this network has really been an important part of kind of drawing those connections, again, those seemingly disparate connections. And I think when we all see ourselves as disconnected, then it's much harder to kind of understand how to resist these processes, right? We feel like we're very much alone. What does Palestine have to do with here, right? Why are we talking about self-determination of Palestinians and we're in, the Saipan, right? But militarism is that connecting dot, right? It helps us to understand how their struggle is deeply connected to our struggle for self-determination, and that it's always ongoing. It's not like, we have Commonwealth status, end of story, right? It's never that simple. And so we see this as an ongoing conversation, and really an opportunity to continue to open up dialogue and conversations about what's happening, and how we see ourselves as part of these global systems, right? So again, in short, we've recognized that the struggle for self-determination is also ours, and because we see Palestinian struggle for self-determination as part of ours as well, that we're able to recognize that we're not powerless, right, to these systems, which is it's a very common refrain here on island, right, is to say, let's not do anything, we're sold out, we've been bought, right? People will say this to us, our own family members, we've been bought. But again, this recognition that we're in this together allows us to understand that we're far from bought. We have our own decision-making capabilities. We have our own power with each other, right? And we want to do something about it. We actually want to say something about it. And so here we are. And again, thank you for being here with us and to cover this such a critical issue.
So now we can open it up for questions. And just before we do that, I think right before you all hopped on, we were also making really important connections to the military expansion in Palau. And so before we open up for questions, I just kind of wanted to see if Dr. Issa or any of the other panelists wanted to speak to what's happening in Palau. Our groups were engaged in a campaign around the military expansion in Palau and a lot of the earth moving and horrible clearing that's taking place there. So I just want to make sure we address that here too. Issa, Sinacora, Rev, Deb, any of you want to speak to that issue?
I'll just speak on it very briefly, but because we feel that it's very much, again, intertwined in this web of militarization, right? So like from Palau to the Marianas to Palestine, this is all connected. Recently, the United States Air Force released an EIS, an environmental impact statement in Norad State in Palau that was open for public comment, right? And so we've teamed up with some folks in Palau and some organizations to see if we could mobilize people to write comments for that particular EIS, because it was very, there weren't, I believe there might have only been one public meeting about the issue. And it's something that the community is now facing an extreme kind of increase of. I think this particular EIS follows 5 other projects that are happening simultaneously, many of them without consent. And so it's a really critical issue that I think is kind of going under the radar at this particular moment, right? But the militarization of Palau, of course, goes hand in hand with the militarization of the Marianas and the other COPA states, right? And so this is also why you're seeing so much funding being pumped by the United States into these areas. So yeah, it's something that's on the top of our minds, and again very much interconnected to the broader issue of militarization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Issa. So now let's go ahead and start with Tomas. Tomas, can we go ahead and start with you? What questions do you have for the panel today?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hafiday. Hi, Dr. Ariola. Nice to see you again. I have 3 questions. My first one is just for general comment on the development in October, where several Pacific Island nations voted against a UNGA non-binding agreement. I just wanted to get your perspective on what that means for this conversation happening right now.
Okay, Reverend Deb, Sanakora, or Dr. Issa, any of you want to reply to that? I mean, it's really heartbreaking, of course, to see, our Pacific sovereign UN member nations vote against the ceasefire. It's extremely heartbreaking, and it's also, for me, reflective of the power of the United States military and funding. These don't necessarily represent decisions of sovereign Pacific nations, maybe more a coercive relationship that exists between the United States federal government and the sovereign Pacific nations. And I think we really need to look at that. Of course, Guahan not being sovereign and then NMI not being sovereign, we don't have a vote on those, on that resolution that call for a ceasefire. And I believe, if we did, we would vote for a ceasefire. I mean, who votes against a ceasefire truly? We really need to ask ourselves that question. What are the motivations for that? And what are the coercive relationships and power dynamics behind a sovereign Pacific nation not voting for a ceasefire? And I'll pass it over to anyone else who wants to add to that. Please chime in.
I think Cora probably has some thoughts, being from the Philippines.
Yeah, well, I'm not proud of the vote of the Philippine government. It abstained, and I don't see any reason why it should abstain. It would have been more honest to have voted yes. But if our representative at the United Nations would kind of observe or follow the provisions, start with the Constitution, which says all this anti-war, all this diplomatic process of resolving, it would not have been difficult to vote for ceasefire. So that's actually a very disappointing thing, but we know, especially at the current time, in the current dispensation under the Marcos leadership, it's a long story to talk about the Marcos dictatorship and it's back. So we understand that there's that's another kind of conversation that we need to deal with. But of course, I would say that even with some of the governments that have voted against the ceasefire, it's actually a very good indication that that the government that has voted yes to the ceasefire could either be under a very under pressure to give that, and there is some exchange going on. We don't know that exactly, but for the Philippines, the ongoing negotiation for more agreed location is there. And I think and then the Philippines need to modernize its military to be able to hedge off any kind of what they call this imagined invasion by China. So these are the narratives that are going on here in the Philippines. So in a way, we could understand why the vote of the Philippines was to abstain.
Right. I'll just add that I think that there's a long history of the U.S. client states, client countries, voting against UN resolutions to condemn the illegal actions of the state of Israel, which there have been many, and this is just another one where, independent countries were not strong enough to go against the state of Israel, the enormous influence that the state of Israel and the U.S. government have.
Yeah, I just to jump in, I mean, I think this is like the votes are very indicative of a colonial relationship between the U.S. and the Pacific, right? I mean, and how much transformative power, maybe even like a chokehold that U.S. aid has over self-determination and political decision-making in the Pacific, because we're following in U.S. voting footsteps, right? Like our Micronesian brothers and sisters. And then those who are not even part of the conversation can't even be there, right? There's no table to be with our Micronesian brothers and sisters in that instant. But yeah, and I also think that in the media, oftentimes what happens is with these votes, right? It's like, how did Micronesia get in there? And it's like another way of like, again, a very like a symptom of this like larger problem of not recognizing that these things are and aid and militarization are like part and parcel of our relationship with the United States. And so I think if we look at it from that way, it becomes less random, right? It becomes less arbitrary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. Tomas, do you have any other?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up and then my last question. So this morning, I'm sure you saw the news of the 4-hour daily humanitarian kind of corridor in northern Gaza that they're setting up. But this group in particular is calling for a complete ceasefire, right?
Yes. Yes.
All right. And then my last question is for Dr. Ariola and Maneka. What actions, community or government, do you want to see on Guam and in the Northern Marianas? Do you have any direct calls to the residents on these islands or to the governor and the legislators here? Both for Guam and the NMI?
Yes, actually, so Isa and I are also organizing with the collective group Marianas for Palestine, and we actually took the lead to draft the statement for that collective, which will be out very soon. And we actually borrowed a couple of the paragraphs from this statement, but also we wanted to address and that's actually here. I can actually share that here, what that statement looks like, so you can also refer to that. But the 4-hour ceasefire, the 4-hour-a-day ceasefire, you know, we cannot see this as Israel's attempt toward peace and securing humanitarian aid. That is, the crisis is overwhelming in Palestine. These you know, the trickling in of trucks and aid has not provided the relief that's needed to the Palestinian people. You know, all of the hospitals are running on generator power. They've been without fuel for several weeks now. You know, we have folks with cancer, premature babies, elders, who are in the hospital, who are suffering, you know, as well as all of the people who've been injured from the bombardment. 4 hours a day is not enough. 4 hours a day does not take away from the carpet bombing that happened, the more than 10,000 people now who have been slaughtered, and the thousands of people who have been displaced. Why a ceasefire isn't happening is, you know, is shocking and deeply disturbing. And, you know, even in our own statement, which we'll be publishing quite soon, you know, our demands for the leaders of Gohan and the Northern Marianas, and I'm happy to say that here. You know, we, the undersigned members of the Collective Marianas for Palestine, we stand vehemently opposed to the ongoing genocide and forced displacement of Palestinian people and enduring apartheid and siege in occupied Palestine. We collectively mourn the thousands of lives violently massacred under the false claim of self-defense, most of them children, and we stand with the many who are grieving and searching for loved ones. Our collective demands are that we ask for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate restoration of water, fuel, food, electricity, and internet connectivity to Gaza and other impacted areas of occupied Palestine, the end of military violence and oppression in the West Bank, immediate aid for the thousands of injured and displaced Palestinians, the end of the arms supplies and US funding to Israel, and the end of apartheid and occupation by the settler colony state of Israel. And in terms of what we're asking for our leaders, we want the leaders of Gohan and the Northern Marianas to join the international community in condemning the blatant violence and ethnic cleansing that's being carried out upon Palestine. We also demand that all of our government institutions and agencies respond and stop advancing Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and racist violence being carried out within our communities. So we want our leaders to demand the ceasefire with us. We want our leaders and our community members, you know, and further, we also, you know, want to say that, you know, for our veteran community and our military community here, we also invite them to stand with us and demand an end to the genocide and apartheid. The qualifications, the classification of genocide is very clear. It's concrete. There are experts on genocides and apartheids all over the world that are saying this is a textbook case of genocide, and the whole world is watching. And, you know, to stay silent is to be complicit. We cannot stay silent against these atrocities. And so we want our leaders to, you know, speak out, speak up, and rise up for a free Palestine, as well as, you know, rise up for all of the other injustices, genocides, and incidents of military violence that are taking place all over the world. I mean, as we're here talking about this statement, there are also horrible things happening in Haiti, Sudan, the Congo, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, as well as in the Philippines and Hawaii and Okinawa and Korea and Guam, and even in California and across the United States, wherever US militarization is touching the ground. We are seeing increases in gendered violence. We are seeing increases in environmental destruction and contamination. We're seeing desecration of the sacred. And, you know, we're looking at the extension of US imperialism and militarization through the settler state of Israel and Palestine now. And that's why we're coming together, and we demand that our leaders join us. To do anything less is standing on the wrong side of history. To do anything less is standing on the side of genocide and apartheid and violent injustice. And so those are our calls. Our groups, Prutehi Litekyan and our Commonwealth 670 are making, along with the many other orgs that are signing on to the statement for Marianas for Palestine.
And Dr. Ariola, real quick, do you want to chime in there? I'm just curious because I know, unlike Guam, I don't think our delegate or anyone in our legislature has come up publicly on this matter. I know a few lawmakers on Guam have, but yeah, anything in particular you think the Commonwealth can contribute or provide?
No, I mean, we stood in solidarity with those on Gohan. Part of the original kind of push in the Marianas for Palestine coalition, right, was to really step up to this resolution on Guam in support of Israel. Nick, can you remind me of the number? I don't have it on hand, and I don't know if we have the media on that, Tomas, or
Yeah.
that was out. But yeah, so that
23-37.
223-37. Yeah, and so that was the kind of original kind of call, right, to action, and we are very much a part of that conversation, that we're recognizing, oh my gosh, here's this resolution here, we have to do something about this, right? And so, I mean, we'd hope we don't see a similar resolution here, right? But still, that again, we see our struggles as combined, and we don't see Gohan as so separate from us, even though we have different legislatures, right? So this is an encouragement, a push to back, to resist, to really call for a ceasefire, right? On throughout the archipelago.
Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tomas. Polly, would you like to go next?
Afade, Polly Suba with PBS Guam. In the statement, first of all, thank you so much for having me part of this meeting here. In your statement, it says the mainstream media, it is assumed that Israel has the right to exist and Palestine does not. If anybody can speak give more insight on that specific statement.
Sure, I can go first. If you just look at Western media from October 7th, there was immediately horrible, massive misinformation that just went all over the world. A lot of the media condemned only, the actions of Hamas. The media has failed to condemn, the over 70 years of violent Israeli occupation, the over 70 years really of the genocide that has been taking place throughout occupied Palestine, the forced displacements, the violent, the settlers who are violently removing Palestinians from their homeland, taking over their homes, destroying their access to food and water. This has been happening for decades now, decades. This is not a phenomenon of just the last month, and if people really look into the history, they will see how Hamas has come to its existence because of Israel. And the media often doesn't report that. The Western American media has been very biased to pushing the agenda of the United States military-industrial complex and war machine. It stands to push the agenda of those who profit from the war industry, and to push a narrative that criminalizes and demonizes, Arab nations now for decades to justify continued war. And so we're calling that out. I mean, we can even see some of the bias in our own local media. Anytime there is a report about military activities or even any critique of military activities, there's often a blackout of activist activities. There's often an undermining or misrepresentation of activist positions on several of the issues, and that's all part of a problem. It's a systemic problem. It's an institutional problem similar to the military. Even Gohan's media roots actually stem from military media roots. If we really look at the very first news media that's here in Guam, the very first printed and radio news start with the military foundation. And we have to decolonize and demilitarize our own media, our educational systems, and we have to recognize that the mass media is a colonial media, which serves at the which serves the agenda of the colonial empire. And so I think I'll just leave that there and see if anybody else wants to add to that, Reverend Deb, Dr. Issa, or Sina Cora, whoever wants to hop on.
I'll just say one thing is like which victims get humanized, what the amount of airtime that gets played. I mean, obviously there are innocent civilian victims on both sides of this, but whose stories are being lifted up? And one of this is kind of systematically a problem because there's no foreign journalists in Gaza. Israel has not let any foreign journalists in Gaza. There have been over 36 media journalists who've been killed in Gaza, who've been bravely trying to report, with situations with very little internet and themselves not having sustenance or safety. So I think that's really problematic. But I think this overall kind of Western bias, towards Israel, the project of Israel, and the US military support of it.
I mean, there was even just this huge protest today at the New York Times. A bunch of protesters showed up to shut down the New York Times for their obviously biased reporting. They're over-reporting of what's happening, from the Israeli perspective, and their complete erasure of the realities of war that are being experienced by the Palestinian people. When you look at the numbers, every 10 minutes a Palestinian child is murdered from the Israeli Defense Forces, and almost 11,000 people now, over 10,000 people slaughtered. And, here you have Western media reporting how the Israeli government is basically saying that that's not even true. There's a huge problem. There's a huge problem of media propaganda and misinformation. And so the media can be complicit to these war crimes as well, can be complicit to this violence just simply by privileging the perspective of the Israeli government over the lives of the Palestinian people.
Understood. And maybe just a follow-up then on how the mainstream media is playing a role in perpetuating double standards in the coverage of the conflicts. And so then, and you probably already spoke on some of them, but maybe you can speak on advocating for change in media reporting.
For sure. Actually, Dr. Issa Ariola is involved in a wonderful project called Words About War. And we're very interested in, helping our regional media and our government really shift the language used. Issa, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, there's a guide actually that's available to media and other folks in the community at wordsaboutwar.org. But basically, there's like a very broad coalition of us, militarism scholars, advocates in the community that, came together to talk about ways that we can be more accurate and more truthful when we talk about war, right? And when we talk about militarization. So you can see in the guide when you go through it, right? Like, what are more truthful ways to talk about, the dying of humans, right? Of people, of humanity, not, collateral damage or bug splat or whatever you want to call it, right? In this really dehumanizing terminology. And that is a really important way of communicating the severity and the reality of what war is, right? And what war can be, and all of this kind of build up to more and more war. And so we are all responsible for speaking more truthfully about what this is. I mean, we hear the stories from our grandparents from World War II, right? Everybody agrees we don't want to see repeat, right, of war. But we have to seriously think about the groundwork that we lay before a war starts, for example, that makes it easier for these types of conflicts to happen, right? And you think language, what's the big deal? No, it really does matter, right? It matters how you classify something, right? Calling something a humanitarian crisis versus a conflict versus a war, right? It tells you who you're placing blame on, what your belief system is really when you're calling out these ideologies. And so even something like defense, right? National security, this is what's happening here in Israel, right? In self-defense, this term really needs to be examined, you know. What's happening is not self-defense. You know, we've come to a point in over 10,000 people dead now that cannot qualify as self-defense, right? That's not what is happening. And so we really need to use again words that are truthful, words that spotlight humanity and not violence, right? Because that type of violence begets more violence.
I want to say something too, just like the way that the media can frame the issue. That's another issue. There's a lot of places where I'm seeing people framing this as a religious war. You know, this is between Jews and Arabs, or this is an inter-ethnic conflict, and they're not framing it. And whereas Christian Jews, Arabs have lived together in that region for hundreds of years together, and it's not a religious war, that this is a war about land, it's about resources, and it's about colonization, and it's about apartheid. You know, it's about the people being treated differently based on race, ethnicity, the color of their skin, having different passports, having different rights, having different access to resources. So I think that it's really important the way that the media can frame it, and it's being framed in you know, in a very limited, narrow way that doesn't really get at the truth, and the way that Palestinians are being equated with terrorists, and that's been going on for 100 years, versus like people who are indigenous to that land and are seeking to be in the place where they've been for generations, and to just live, and to be their humanity is being denied.
I just have one more question, and it's you spoke on what national security is and isn't. The government of Guam, the government, right? Our governor, senators even have said that the threat, China's threat is real. And there's already the plans for the Missile Defense Agency to have a 360-degree missile defense system in Guam. Can this missile defense system exist in Guam and also genuine security, as you have stated in your statement?
That's a really good question, Polly. You know, but to also just go back to this point about the media, you know, like for instance, the Western media is really not reporting about that there are actual government documents, Israeli government documents that have been leaked that show plans for this forced removal and genocide, that this is actually a planned second Nakba, and it is for control of oil, water, and other resources in Gaza. It's to create, you know, a canal to Gaza. And so there's a lot that the media is not reporting, you know, that this is very much happening for a settlement to replace Palestinians in their own land and to control those resources. And it's important to mention that these resources have been controlled for many decades now. The flow of water, fuel, and many other resources has been controlled by Israel and limited to the Palestinian people. Their movement is limited. They can't even travel from one Palestinian land to another freely. They have different license plates. This is true apartheid, you know, like apartheid that was done away with in South Africa, like Jim Crow in the United States. This is violent apartheid, and the Western media is completely, you know, underreporting that, despite, you know, many reports now from international organizations, legal experts, human rights experts on genocide and apartheid, people in the United Nations, at Amnesty International, at Human Rights Watch. They've been actually saying this for years. This is nothing new that they've been reporting to the rest of the world, and Western media has consistently erased that. And in terms of, you know, this discussion about, you know, the missile defense system, you know, we're looking at, like many of the other military projects here in Guahan and the Marianas, we're looking at, you know, impacts to water security, to burial sites, to, limestone forest ecologies. The massive clearing and grading of land is basically guaranteeing the destruction of our ecosystem, the extinction of rare and endangered species, desecration of our lands, and ultimately our forced removal as well, because more land is going to be taken by eminent domain, which means the military footprint will be larger and will be further dispossessed from indigenous lands here. And that's what's happening in Palau. That's what's happening in the Northern Marianas. That's what's happening anywhere. Basically, the United States is trying to build a base. And so, yes, to say that a missile, we could sit here today and argue that deterrence, the idea of deterrence and the missile defense system does not align with the framework of genuine security. It actually makes us more insecure in all the ways that I've mentioned, but also in the very fact and reality that it positions us as a place for the United States to project its force. And so it makes us a larger target for war. Guam, the Philippines, Okinawa, Hawaii, the Northern Marianas, we are the first strike communities. We are the first in line to be destroyed. And as Issa mentioned, we already know very well from recent history what that's like, to be the collateral damage, to be the stomping grounds for war. And we can't use that language. We can't use that language, collateral damage and stomping grounds, because it minimizes really what's at stake, which is human lives and lands and waters that our ancestors have lived in for thousands and thousands of years. And just in saying that, you can hear the parallels. You can hear the parallels of the people of Palestine. You can hear the parallels of the people of the Philippines, in Okinawa, in Hawaii, and in the United States, and in Puerto Rico. I mean, we could go on and on and on. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Issa.
I wanted to jump off you because I think a question like that, I mean, I think I would like the Pentagon to answer that question, right? And I think a lot of the ways that they answer that question, well, they have, right? Clearly, they think Guam is a target because they wouldn't call the airfield on Tinian the divert airfield. Why do they call it the divert airfield? Well, they call it that in case Guam gets quote unquote knocked out. They need another place to operate from, right? So if we're thinking of their own language and the way that they're conceptualizing, we don't have to guess. I mean, I think it's very clear, actually. I think a lot of times it gets convoluted, but it's very clear how they're kind of planning sometimes the way that they kind of describe our islands and the terms that they use, how they see us, right? Like how they see our islands functioning in their plans in that sense, right? So I think it very much a missile defense system. I mean, I think a question to them would be: do they believe it will defend? Do they believe it will actually protect the islands? I'm not even sure that they think that. Judging by the plans and the kind of conversations that have come out so far, there's really no indication that it's a foolproof plan anyway. And so I think it's always best to look towards what they say to answer those kinds of questions.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that it's very important to ask some questions, and I would, venture to ask really why is the United States pouring in billions of dollars to support Israel, to buy more arms and all this. It's not only in terms of, providing the arms and supporting it. There are also deployment of troops and military hardwares that are being deployed in that region. So that question, these are destructive components. Who gains out of all these deals? Because if we look at, for example, the war that happened in Iraq, for example, we know who gained out of that. We know also that after the destruction, the United States have the solution to it, finding, what the restoration and reconstruction and, all these things in the name of humanitarian support. So again, who who profits from all this situation, and we know where that is. If we look at the complicated or whatever image of the military industrial complex, we would know the answer. The big arms manufacturers and weapons dealers and all this. That's the answer, and definitely we know that it does not profit the people at all. It's this thing about forever wars. I mean, we are looking at it in the Philippines, for example. It's not just, saying there should be no war, but we can also look at it as a situation where there is actually a programmed effort to have this go on, because there's so much profit out of this situation.
So just Masi Sina, I have no more questions. Thank you so much for the panel.
Thank you so much. And we're so proud of our Guahan and Northern Mariana sisters in the network for speaking out even on that side of the world, and joining in the statement, and doing the hard work of continuing to elevate this issue. And we really appreciate their work, Monica and Isa.
Yeah, I'd like to chime into that. I know there's really a very different situation, especially in Guam and in the Marianas. And I would add to that, our media friends maybe could look at the situation in Palau. This is very critical. We're hoping to be able to build a regional, way of dealing with it, because it's, when we look at the impact of where this will go, it's not limited to Palau alone. It's going to be the whole region, and there are many things to look at here. For example, water. When Hawaii has identified the contamination in Red Hill, now the government have said, they're finding solution. And apparently the solution that they found is to bring this contaminated water to other countries, like the Philippines, Singapore. I don't know where else. But we're saying, no, you cannot dump this contaminated waters. That's not the solution. And I think that we should say that as well. And we're hoping media would investigate and look into it, because this is a very common problem in almost all of the US military facilities present in this region.
Thank you so much, Sina Cora, and thank you, Dr. Isa, Reverend Deb, and of course Polly, and for being here. And I guess we just lost our friend Tomas, but I just wanted to say, Polly, that the framework for genuine security was just shared in the chat, and just looking at it, you can see how it doesn't align with the plans for the missile defense system. I mean, it's talking about the protection of human lives, of the environment, of having an environment to sustain human life, and from avoiding and also protecting us from avoidable harm. And so all of these actions that have happened here, that happened in the Philippines, that have happened in all the places we mentioned, those are really examples of how, these harms that were avoidable were carried out anyway. And so we have to come from that position, that we know what to do and we have to do it. And so anyway, please take a look at this framework. We've been hearing genuine security being thrown around sort of haphazardly, and we're not okay with that. It means something very specific, and it was developed by the members of this network. And we really need, local leaders in the media to recognize that it's a very real framework developed by an international group of scholars, activists, and people on the ground. And it means, genuine security is very different from national security and from military security. It's actually, it serves a greater purpose. And so just thank you so much for that. And I guess we can end here. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll just stop the recording.
This Masi Pali, thank you. It's very